Welcome to the Alaska Weather Show. I'm meteorologist Peter Chan coming to you from the National Weather Service in Anchorage. And it is Friday, April 16th, 2021. Well, finally, spring has arrived here in Alaska. We are going to be enjoying some fine weather across much of the state. There are a few areas still enduring some winter weather. And as a reminder, if you want to check out the phone maze and get an automated phone forecast, you can call 1-800-472-0391 or go online, better yet, weather.gov/Alaska. So taking a look at what we have here, of course, with these warmer temperatures, it's the beginning of the river breakup season, and so far ice is holding, but with these warming temperatures and the fact that we are gaining nearly 6 minutes of daylight each day is going to help facilitate the river breakup. And as things get going, we will keep you posted. One thing, though, we are very interested, especially our hydrologist at the River Forecast Center, we need your help. What we need is spotter reports. If you're in the vicinity of a river or happen to be flying over one, any pictures and videos would be muchly appreciated, along with any verbal reports of what you've seen. If there's any sort of damage or threatening any property, that is something we want to know about. And you can submit your reports by email to nws.ar.aprfc@noaa.gov or call 1-800-847-1739. And the hydrologist there will be very appreciative because it helps them in their forecast and warning information that they can provide for you. So, as I mentioned, we have some very nice early spring weather upon much of the state here coming up this weekend and early next week. Still some issues, though, in the west and northwest. We have winter storm warnings still in effect there for the west end of the Seward Peninsula on over toward St. Lawrence Island for blowing snow. There's also been some freezing fog, and conditions will be improving. The warning is in effect until 6 a.m. Saturday. And then farther north as we go up across Kotzebue Sound on up to Point Hope and Wainwright, there are winter weather advisories primarily for blowing snow, and also there have been some reduction in visibility due to some freezing fog. But that aside, that's about it. The other thing, too, just from an aviation standpoint, and also just with the melting that's occurring, that introduces some low-level moisture. So a number of the interior valleys of the state will have a tendency to develop some areas of fog or some areas of lower stratus clouds at nighttime into the early morning. But that will tend to burn off or at least lift as we go through the afternoon hours, because we do have an area of high pressure across much of the central southern part of the state into northwest Canada. So it's setting up these conditions that are going to allow us to really warm up and experience some better weather if you're tired of the long cold stretch that we had here February, March into early April. So looking at satellite imagery, there's a few weather systems to focus on. The hints of the first one there is down in the North Pacific, south of the Gulf of Alaska. We are watching an area of low pressure that's going to remain south of the state, especially south of the Southwest Peninsula early next week. But it is going to try to fling some rain showers up to near Kodiak Island and along the the Southwest Peninsula. Now up to the west and northwest, you can see the area of enhanced clouds from around Nome up to Kotzebue, and that area is where there's been some blowing snow, also some freezing fog, and winds have been gusting as high as 50 miles an hour. So creating those conditions that will continue tonight, at least into early tomorrow morning, before those winter storm warnings and winter weather advisories expire around 6 a.m. Further west, there is a frontal system out over the western Aleutians, and that system is working its way eastward, though it is going to tend to lose some strength as it comes eastward. So there will be a band of primarily some rain showers moving through the western and central Aleutians with that system tonight into tomorrow. So we can take a look at what we have in the way of surface weather maps. There is an area of high pressure that extends from southwest Alaska into the interior of the Yukon Valley. And this features what's bringing very clear skies, especially south central areas. But you can see the snow, blowing snow and some fog there along the northwest coast, especially from the western Seward Peninsula northward. And then out over the western Bering, there's an area of low pressure off of Kamchatka that is going to be working its way to the east-northeast and weakening. The frontal system associated with that will also be weakening with a band of rain showers moving through the central Aleutians. Now, as we go through tonight into pre-dawn hours of Saturday morning, high pressure will be well in place there along the Alaska-Yukon border, and that'll provide generally clear skies, but watch for some areas of fog and low cloudiness to redevelop in the interior tonight as that moisture cools and condenses out. Across the far southwest peninsula and Kodiak Island, there could be some rain showers or mixed showers in the higher elevations as some of that moisture from that North Pacific system brushes the state down that way. And then off to the west, you can see the weakening frontal system that is moving into the central Aleutians with that area of low pressure starting to split a bit and weaken. As we go through the day on Saturday, we are looking for high pressure to continue to dominate the weather over northwest Canada into the interior of Alaska. That'll bring some very nice weather, especially to the Yukon Valley southward into portions of the southeast. There could be record high temperatures not only around Anchorage in the mid and upper 50s here Sunday into Monday, but around 60 degrees in Juneau. And you can see that frontal system continuing to weaken, just a trough of low pressure out there moving into the eastern Aleutians. And then finally on Sunday, hints of that low pressure system in the North Pacific that will bypass the state, stay south of Kodiak Island and the Alaska Peninsula, but nevertheless spread some moisture northward in the form of some rain and rain showers, mainly from Kodiak Island and the peninsula out into the eastern Aleutians, whereas high pressure remains in control over the northern half of the state into northwest Canada. So low temperatures Saturday morning will stay above freezing across southeast Alaska. And as we get toward areas westward, a little below freezing into the 20s, mid-upper 20s around Anchorage and outlying areas. As we head into Saturday, though, nice weather back up near 50 Anchorage, but getting up close, approaching 60 there at Juneau and in the lower 60s at Ketchikan. As we go into Sunday morning, low temperatures will stay above freezing, upper 30s to around 40 degrees in the southeast. And up around 30 or so in the Anchorage area, outlying areas in the 20s, except for along the coast where readings will stay above freezing. And then on Sunday afternoon, we're looking for highs at least into the 50s across much of South Central, including the Kenai Peninsula, and temperatures upper 50s to around 60 degrees across the northern portion of the southeast, could even be flirting with near 70 degrees there in the southern end. Ketchikan off toward the west. Now in the north, of course, colder temperatures. Tonight readings stay below freezing in the upper teens and 20s. During the day, though, on Saturday, with some help of some sun along and south of the Yukon River, we could see some readings break 50 degrees. And on Sunday morning, lows down into the teens along the Arctic coast and the Brooks Range, and generally in the 20s along and south of the Yukon Valley. Temperatures could get up near freezing up there, Prudhoe Bay, as well as in the northwest toward Wainwright and Port Hope. And we are looking for highs back up into the 50s across and south of the Yukon River. Finally, the southwest areas out into the Aleutians. Tonight we'll see lows generally in the 20s in the interior of the southwest. Readings around or a bit above freezing, extending out into the Aleutian chain. And as we go through Saturday afternoon, we are looking for temperatures to get back up potentially above 50 as we get toward McGrath. And then areas along the peninsula will generally be in the 40s with upper 30s to lower 40s as we go further out along the Aleutian chain. And then finally, as we look here Sunday morning, lows will get down a bit below freezing and across the interior there in the southwest, but generally above freezing in the mid, even upper 30s coastal areas once you get out along the peninsula there. And temperatures on Sunday afternoon Very nice. The interior there getting up into the low, even mid-50s, with readings generally in the 40s along the Alaska Peninsula.
And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
We now have our aviation weather segment of the show, and our flying weather for Saturday morning shows that we continue to see areas of IFR conditions across the eastern interior and south of the Brooks Range, as well as in parts of western Alaska. By and large, we have large area of high pressure over much of the eastern, south-central areas into northwest Canada, so we're getting some melting now with the increasing sun angle. That low-level moisture then at nighttime, early morning, condenses out as areas of low clouds and fog. Off to the west, trough, a low pressure coming in off of the eastern Bering, creating IFR conditions there in the far west, and then another frontal system that'll be in the process of weakening is crossing the central Aleutians with an area of low pressure in the North Pacific. Going to try and push some IFR conditions up into the areas well offshore of the southwest Kodiak Island. Now, during the day, Saturday afternoon, obviously conditions will tend to improve, especially across the interior beneath high pressure. Some beautiful early spring weather, but extensive IFR conditions are anticipated out over the eastern and central Bering, there west and southwest of the mainland. And then as we go into Sunday morning, we see those areas of IFR conditions redevelop across parts of the interior, with pretty extensive IFR conditions along the west coast and out over into the central Bering Sea. And then finally, Sunday afternoon, the same thing. Conditions improve across the interior areas, much of northwest Canada, with an area of IFR primarily there south of the Southwest Peninsula in the North Pacific and also out over the eastern Bering Sea. So past conditions Saturday, Anaktuvik will see MVFR, even IFR conditions south there of the south entrance, improving to VFR in the afternoon. That'll also be the case at Adigan. In the morning hours, there will be MVFR and even IFR conditions farther south there of the south entrance, improving then to VFR during the afternoon. Generally speaking, Lake Clark and Merrill on Saturday will enjoy VFR conditions, as will Rainy Pass, as well as Windy Pass. And that continues to the north and east at Isabel. Around Mentasta, we could see kind of some MVFR conditions holding throughout the day. And as we go a little back toward the southwest, Tanita, MVFR improving to VFR, and then Portage should stay VFR throughout the day on Saturday. And that will also be the case in the southeast at Chilkoot and White. Looking at freezing levels, obviously with the warming temperatures, we're going to see higher freezing levels up through the northwest. There will be pockets of 6,000 and just above 6,000 foot freezing levels, generally though above 4,000 feet. As we get into south central areas, 4,000 to 6,000 foot freezing levels, especially getting off there toward the Kenai, Prince William Sound, and upwards to 8,000, even 10,000 feet in the southeast, especially as we get further south toward Haida Gwaii. And then out toward the west, little pocket there of 2,000 to 4,000 foot freezing levels there in the central Aleutians. Icing should not be a significant issue. That area of precipitation associated with the low in the North Pacific should remain primarily south of Kodiak Island in the southwest. You can see pockets of below 3,000 feet there in the interior north or south of the Brooks Range, and then generally above 12,000, below 16,000 feet with that frontal system in the central Aleutians. And looking at our upper level jet stream winds, we have a weak high pressure circulation there in northeast Alaska. Across the southwest, winds will be out of the south upwards to 60 and 80 knots. And generally along the west coast, upper level winds around 60 to 65 knots from the south. And then going down to mid-levels, 9,000 foot winds, we continue to see a couple of weak high circulations across the eastern and south central areas of the state, with along the west coast, south to southwest winds of around 35 to near 40 knots. And then getting down to the 3,000 foot level, general high pressure over much of the eastern interior into northwest Canada. Southeast winds around 35 knots at Kodiak Island, and then back up there toward the Bering Strait, southwest winds of 45 knots. And a quick check of turbulence, there could be some isolated moderate to considerable moderate turbulence in pockets in the northwest and around St. Lawrence Island, as well as out over the central Aleutians below 3,000 feet.
Welcome back to another edition of Alaska Weather Facts. I'm meteorologist Dave Snyder, and joining me once again is Eric Stevens from GINA, the Geographic Information Network of Alaska, based up at the University of Alaska Fairbanks. Eric, welcome back to the program.
Hey, I'm glad to be here.
And once again, you brought some wonderful satellite pictures to show us and do a little show and tell about. It's just amazing. I can get lost in satellite pictures all day. What did you bring today?
Right. Well, weather satellites, what are they good for? Yeah. Of course, there's the pretty pictures that they bring us. You know, we've got a picture here from April of 2012. Okay. The Sumi NPP satellite, it's what they call a polar orbiter, which means it covers Alaska because we're near the pole. Beautiful image. You can see a storm off of southeast Alaska, the sea ice along the Bering Sea up into the Arctic. A really nice picture, and this is important because it allows a forecaster to see where the storms are, where the ice is, where the clear areas are. You need to know where the weather is now if you're going to forecast it into the future. Exactly. So satellites give us these good pictures. This is called surveillance of the weather. And you know, that same satellite also has another picture from a little more recently, August of 2014, Tropical Storm Iselle bearing down on the Hawaiian Islands. Okay. Hawaii doesn't get hit by a whole lot of tropical storms or hurricanes. Sometimes it does. And here's a picture from the same satellite, the Sumi NPP Polar Orbiter. It shows Tropical Storm Iselle approaching the Hawaiian Islands from the southeast. You can see the storm swirling away there, and then there's the Hawaiian Islands. This is a tropical storm, not quite as strong as a hurricane because we don't see the eye wall in there. This is still a serious weather system. And all of this information comes just from that satellite picture. It's so much information, and it's wonderful to look at. You see the beauty and the awe of nature right there depicted in that weather satellite. We call it a polar orbiter because the satellite flies high over the globe. Maybe we could look here at we happen to bring the planet Earth with us. This is our satellite. A polar orbit flies really close to the Earth, maybe 800 kilometers over the Earth, and goes up over the pole and then back down, and then the Earth spins under the satellite as it goes by. That's in contrast to the geostationary birds, which are much further out. And they don't view Alaska quite as well. So we love those polar orbiter satellites here in Alaska.
So when we're a lot closer, we get much better details and imagery and an idea of a better maybe position of what's going on when it's passing right over Alaska or right over Hawaii.
Yes, exactly right. The polar orbiter gives such a good view of places like Alaska. And because it's close to the planet, there's another aspect of satellites in the polar orbit that is helpful for weather forecasting. It's an aspect that's maybe not as immediately obvious as the pretty pictures that we see. And that is the capacity for the satellite to produce what's called a sounding. That is finding the vertical profile of temperature and moisture in the atmosphere. We've all heard of weather balloons. Weather balloons are launched here in Alaska twice a day at a number of airports, everywhere from Barrow to St. Paul Island to Kodiak, Anchorage and Fairbanks, Yakutat, a number of places. Launch these balloons, and we've got a picture of a balloon being launched at an airport, and the balloon goes up. It's pulling a little package, an instrument package with it that reports temperature, pressure, humidity data back, and we use that information to help feed what are called numerical weather prediction models.
The models.
The models, right. It's a mouthful, so we just call it the models. And these computer simulations, these models are computer programs that simulate the motion of the atmosphere. Well, how does a model know what the future will be like? You have to tell the model what things are like now. And you give it all kinds of information, including information from these satellite sounders. Very important. Just how important are they? We have a recent, comparatively recent study that really brings home, and this is Superstorm Sandy. We have a track image here of the track of Hurricane Sandy. Was down in the Caribbean around Cuba, and then it moved north over the ocean, offshore of the eastern seaboard, and then at the last minute, Sandy made what's called the left hook. It turned hard to the left and slammed into New Jersey. Was a major problem for the mid-Atlantic states, a calamity. It fused with another weather system and became known, this is not an official title, but Superstorm Sandy. It was quite the weather event. Well, the modelers, after the event, there's a group of modelers in Europe. They have a very good model, a frustratingly good model if you're the Americans trying to pursue their excellence. They reran their model afterwards in what's called a data denial study, where they kept everything the same. So this is 6 months after Sandy, but they went back, they reran the same model, they fed the model the same initial conditions, that is telling the model, okay, here's where we think Sandy is, down near Cuba in the Caribbean. Everything was the same as it was in the real forecast, except they didn't let the model know.
No satellite data.
No satellite data. So we're going to put that over here, no satellite data for you. The resulting forecast 5 days out, back when the real Sandy was happening and the model had the satellite data, the forecast was pretty good. We've got a graphic here on the left side. We show the forecast of where Sandy would be, and that's the red bullseye on the left. It's just south of where it actually wound up hitting. Not a bad forecast from this computer simulation, 120 hours out. On the right, you see the same model, but it didn't have the satellite data to help it understand things. And the storm is way offshore. It misses. The forecast is more accurate when the model has the satellite data. So that's the idea today we want to convey, is weather satellites. They're important because they show us the pictures of where storms are. We see good examples of this. Yeah, the surveillance right now, it's great to look at those pictures. And in addition, behind the scenes, maybe not immediately obvious, but the models have to have that satellite data for them to be good forecasts. And then a meteorologist uses that information to help everyone with the forecast of where the storms will be in the future.
That is fascinating information that we can look at, see where things have been, because you can't know where you're going if you don't know where you've been. That's that old adage there. But seeing that satellites are actually helping us move forward in the weather information system is pretty amazing stuff.
You bet.
And if you want to check out Eric's satellite images that he's been talking about, whether that's something from today or last week or even much further back in Alaska history, you can easily do that yourself. Go to www.gina.alaska.edu and you can find those images there. Eric, thanks so much for joining us once again. And again, we will join you hopefully again soon for another edition of Alaska Weather Facts, where you'll tell us more really cool information about the satellites over our heads in Alaska. Thanks for joining us tonight, and we'll see you next time.
And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Welcome back for the marine section of the forecast. I'm David Kramer here with your sea ice analysis. Starting off with our sea ice from areas that are west of St. Matthew Island, we are looking at that ice continuing to retreat. However, areas to the east of St. Matthew Island, including the southwest coastline, we are expecting those areas to continue to push farther to the south. Out over the Cook Inlet area, there will continue to be gradual melting and thinning of the ice. Looking down in southeast Alaska on Saturday in the inside waters, northerly flow throughout, 10 knots down south and get up to as high as 30 knots up by Lynn Canal. Out over the Gulf waters, northeast winds, 15 knots in the far eastern areas, getting up to 15 to 25 as we get farther to the north with gusts to 25 near Yakutat. On Sunday for southeast in the inside waters, northerly winds, 15 knots out down south, increasing as we move farther to the north, getting up to as high as 25 knots by Lynn Canal. Out over the Gulf waters, all easterly flow, 20 to 25 knots with seas around 6 feet. For Saturday for south central Alaska, weak winds out over the Gulf waters, primarily a northerly flow around 10 knots and 10 north out of the northwesterly direction in Prince William Sound. In Cook Inlet, north to northeast winds, 10 knots up north, getting up to 20 knots as we get farther to the south, and then 20 knots out of the north, west of the Barren Islands. On Sunday, in Cook Inlet area, northerly winds 15 to 25 knots, strongest farthest to the south, 25 knots out of the northeast, west of the Barren Islands. To the east of the Barren Islands, northeast winds 25 to 30 knots, northern portions of the Gulf, east to northeast winds 20 knots, and then 10 knots out of the north for Prince William Sound. Saturday for the Alaska Peninsula and Kodiak Island. Starting around Kodiak Island, northeasterly winds 25 knots expected. For the Bering side, northeast winds 20 knots, and then for the Pacific side, northeast to east winds 20 to 25 knots. On Sunday around Kodiak Island, northeast winds 30 to 35 knots, northeast winds throughout the Alaska Peninsula as well, 25 to 30 knots on the Pacific side and 20 knots on the Bering side. For the Aleutian Islands on Saturday, out by the eastern Aleutian Islands, northeast winds 10 to 15 knots, becoming southeasterly around 20 knots for the central Aleutians, and then becoming north to northwest by the western Aleutians around 30 knots, seas up to as high as 14 feet, highest by the western Aleutians. On Sunday for the western Aleutians, north to northwest winds 20 to 25 knots, and then for the central and eastern Aleutian Islands, we are going to see northerly winds 15 to 20 knots by the central Aleutians and 25 knots by the eastern Aleutians. Along the west coast on Saturday, primarily seeing Easterly winds around Nunavik Island, around 20 knots on the south side, 15 knots on the north side, becoming more southerly by St. Lawrence Island, 25 knots there. In Norton Sound area, easterly winds 10 knots. Then out by St. Matthew Island, southeast winds 20 knots, and by the Pribilof Islands, southeast winds 15 knots expected. For Sunday, weaker winds up in the Norton Sound area, around 10 knots there, and at around 10 knots for St. Lawrence Island as well. Somewhat variable for those winds, however, a little bit more northerly as we get closer towards the Norton Sound area. As we get by Nunavik Island, we're going to see north to northeast winds around 20 knots. Then out by St. Matthew Island, southeast winds 15 knots. By the Pribilof Islands, northerly winds at 20 knots are expected. Along the Arctic coastline, we are going to see winds out of a west to southwest direction, 20 knots. Down the west coast of the state, we're going to see southerly winds, 30 knots up by Point Lay, 35 knots by Point Hope, and then 25 knots on either side of the Bering Strait. On Sunday, along the Arctic coastline, west to southwest winds, 10 to 15 knots in eastern locations, 20 knots as we get to Ukjuagvik and areas to the west. For the west coast, we're going to see southerly winds, 10 to 25 knots, weakest south of the Bering Strait, strongest near Point Hope. For a recap of our weather for tonight, high pressure is dominating mainland Alaska as well as the southeastern areas of the state, keeping precipitation fairly at bay farther to the south. We're going to see fog in areas of the interior and much of the northern half of the west coast. As we look out over the Bering Sea, a diminishing front is moving towards the central Aleutian Islands, bringing a mix of rain and snow to the islands. And then out by the Alaska Peninsula and Kodiak Island area, we're going to see a mixture of rain and snow, primarily rain at most low-lying areas, especially near the water. As we move into Saturday, continuing to see rain by Kodiak Island and the Alaska Peninsula, but high pressure is the story for mainland Alaska, dominating the state, keeping mainland dry as well as southeast Alaska. There will be some areas of blowing snow off the northwest coastline. And then as we look at our front that's pushing through the Bering Sea, or I should say rather the former front that has broken down, we are going to see some lingering rain and snow in areas of the central Aleutians and central Bering. Finally, as we move into Sunday, more rain for Kodiak Island and the Alaska Peninsula, but we'll also see some rain in eastern portions of the Bering, as well as the eastern Aleutian Islands. The main story for mainland is still going to be high pressure dominating the area, keeping the mainland dry, as well as down in southeast. For Alaska Weather, I'm David Kramer.
These forecasts are for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating.